The key burned against Lady Honoria Vale's palm as if it already knew she was about to be told she no longer belonged. She sat alone in the hired carriage while the iron gates of Brackenhurst Hall opened before her, their black spears rising against the pale Hampshire sky with the severe elegance of a family that had never needed to ask permission from anyone. Beyond them, the avenue rolled forward between clipped beeches and winter-bare oaks, every branch dark and exact, every stone of the drive swept clean. It was a house built to remind visitors of their place before a word had been spoken. Honoria had known such houses all her life. She had been born the younger daughter of the late Earl of Valehurst, taught to lower her voice in drawing-rooms, to recognize rank without staring at it, to smile when insult arrived dressed as concern. Yet no lesson had prepared her for returning to Brackenhurst as a dependent guest, carrying in her glove the one small object no one here knew she possessed. The old brass boundary key had belonged to her mother. It was worn smooth at the bow, darkened where fingers had held it for years, and heavier than it looked. Honoria had carried it since dawn, though it opened nothing she could prove. Not yet. The carriage slowed near a side lane where a mossy stone arch stood half swallowed by ivy. Beyond it lay a narrow path that crossed toward Larkspur Park, the neighboring estate whose pale chimneys could barely be seen through a stand of trees. Her breath caught before she could command it back. Her mother had once described the gate in a voice soft with memories she rarely allowed herself. There had been apples along the wall then, and a pond where swans nested, and a blue room at Larkspur where a girl without parents had first learned what safety felt like. Honoria leaned slightly toward the window. The key shifted in her palm. For one foolish second, she imagined stepping down, crossing to the arch, fitting the brass tooth into the lock, and entering the only place her mother had ever called home without sorrow. "Stop here, please," she said. The coachman pulled the horses to a careful halt. Before the footman could open the door, Honoria had already gathered her skirts. The air outside was damp and clean, carrying the smell of wet stone, leaf mold, and distant chimney smoke. She walked toward the ivy-covered arch with the measured composure of a woman taking an innocent look at an old boundary. Her heart did not obey that composure. It beat hard enough that she felt it in her throat. The lock on the gate was newer than she expected, black iron instead of weathered brass, and the chain looped through it looked recently oiled. She lifted her gloved hand, not quite touching it. "That gate is not in use, my lady." The voice came from behind her, sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. Honoria turned. A young understeward stood on the drive, his coat neat, his expression arranged into the blank respect servants used when delivering disrespect on behalf of their betters. He bowed, but not low enough. "I only wished to see whether it was the old Larkspur passage," Honoria said. "I remember my mother speaking of it. Her ladyship gave instructions that guests are not to wander near the boundary." "Her ladyship?" "Lady Octavia Fenwick, my lady." "Of course." Lady Octavia had only been at Brackenhurst for 6 months, yet already the servants repeated her preferences as though they were estate law. Honoria let her fingers close more firmly around the hidden key. "I was not wandering. I was looking. The lane beyond is private." His gaze moved, almost imperceptibly, from her modest travelling cloak to the small trunk being lifted from the carriage. "It is no longer meant for those without business there." Those without business. The phrase settled softly and cruelly between them. Honoria had heard worse in prettier rooms. She had learned long ago that the first humiliation was rarely the loudest. It was the small correction at a gate, the servant who understood he could speak down because someone higher had permitted it, the reminder that birth without fortune became a title without shelter. She looked past him toward Larkspur Park, where the trees hid everything except a pale suggestion of roofline. "Then I shall not delay the drive." "Very good, my lady." He bowed again. This time Honoria noticed that he avoided looking at her hand. Perhaps he had not seen the key. Perhaps he had, and did not understand. She returned to the carriage without haste. She would not give a stranger the satisfaction of seeing her hurry from a place her mother had loved. As the horses moved on, Brackenhurst Hall rose fully into view. Its long front of grey stone commanded the slope, with tall windows catching the weak afternoon light and a broad portico supported by columns too massive to be welcoming. The house was beautiful in the way a verdict could be beautiful. Perfectly formed. Utterly final. Honoria smoothed the creases from her gloves. Her gown was respectable but not new, a dark blue wool altered twice by careful hands. The ribbon at her bonnet had been turned and pressed so well that only another woman of reduced means would have noticed. She wore no jewels except a mourning brooch containing a curl of her mother's hair. No one at Brackenhurst would call her shabby. They would call her unfortunate. It was a kinder word, and therefore more useful. When the carriage stopped before the steps, the great doors opened. Warmth, polish, wax, and money breathed out from the entrance hall. Lady Octavia Fenwick stood beneath the carved balcony as if she had been placed there by a portrait painter who specialized in command. She was handsome rather than pretty, silver-haired, straight-backed, dressed in violet silk that made mourning appear almost decorative. Her smile reached precisely as far as etiquette required. "Lady Honoria," she said. "How good of you to come." "Lady Octavia." Honoria curtsied. "You were kind to invite me." Kindness is easiest when one remembers old connections. Lady Octavia extended her hand, then withdrew it before Honoria could do more than touch her fingers. "Your poor father was always spoken of with affection. Such a pity that the Valehurst estate became so complicated after his death." The pause was delicate. The wound beneath it was not. Honoria heard the unspoken inventory. No strong brother. No settled fortune. No mother living. No house of her own. "My father left many debts of gratitude," Honoria replied. "I try to honor the ones I can." Lady Octavia's eyes sharpened for one blink, then softened again. "How admirable! Come in before you chill yourself." Hampshire air is not always forgiving, especially to ladies who have been too long without a proper country establishment. A footman took Honoria's cloak. Another servant carried her small trunk with a care that seemed almost embarrassed by its lightness. Honoria stepped into the hall. Portraits of Wycliffe ancestors stared down from the walls, dukes and duchesses preserved in oil, each face certain of its place in the world. She wondered whether certainty was inherited like land, or merely performed so often that no one dared challenge it. Lady Octavia moved beside her, close enough to be gracious, far enough to imply distance. "His Grace is not expected until tomorrow. The Duke has been detained in London by parliamentary matters and estate business. You will find Brackenhurst quiet until then. I hope not to disturb the household." "My dear, disturbance is rarely caused by those who understand the limits of hospitality." The words were soft enough that a passing footman could pretend not to hear. Honoria did not look away. "Then I shall be careful to understand them." "Excellent." Lady Octavia smiled. "I always say that a woman's comfort depends upon knowing where she is useful and where she is merely present." The key pressed into Honoria's palm through the kid leather of her glove. For a moment, the entrance hall seemed to narrow around her, all polished stone and old blood and cold judgment. She thought of her mother as a girl at Larkspur, standing perhaps on the other side of that forgotten gate, hoping that safety could be held by a key. She thought of the understeward saying the lane was not meant for those without business there. She thought of Lady Octavia's smile, bright as a knife under candlelight. Honoria lowered her eyes, not in surrender, but because she had learned that silence often revealed more than protest. "I am grateful for your guidance," she said. "Are you?" Lady Octavia's tone was almost amused. "That is wise." A sudden stir moved through the far side of the hall. Boots sounded on stone. A footman appeared at the entrance, flushed from haste and trying not to show it. Lady Octavia turned with irritation already forming. "What is it?" The footman bowed low. "His Grace has returned, my lady." The announcement struck the hall with more force than a slammed door. Lady Octavia's smile did not vanish, but it became fixed, as if every muscle in her face had received a different instruction from her mind. Honoria felt the shift at once. Servant straightened. A maid near the stair lowered her gaze. Even the air seemed to arrange itself for the arrival of a man whose name had governed the house long before his body crossed its threshold. Then Adrian Wycliffe, Duke of Caldermere, stepped into Brackenhurst Hall with travel dust on his dark coat and London still in the severity of his expression. He was taller than Honoria had expected, broad-shouldered without ostentation, his face cut in lines too controlled to be called handsome by accident. His hair was dark, his eyes a grey so clear they seemed less to look than to measure. He removed his gloves slowly, handed them to a footman, and took in the scene before him. Lady Octavia. The waiting servants. Honoria standing near the center of the hall with one hand closed too tightly inside her glove. His gaze touched her only briefly, but the touch was enough to make the key in her palm feel exposed. "I was told you would return tomorrow, Your Grace," Lady Octavia said, recovering first. "So was I." His voice was low, cool, and beautifully precise. Parliament proved less stubborn than expected. "Then Brackenhurst is fortunate." "Is it?" His eyes moved again to Honoria. "We appear to have a guest." Lady Octavia turned with a softness Honoria distrusted at once. Lady Honoria Vale. The late Earl of Valehurst's younger daughter. Her family and ours have old connections, though time has not been equally kind to all branches. Honoria curtsied because rank required it, not because Lady Octavia had made the introduction generously. "Your Grace." The Duke inclined his head. "Lady Honoria." Nothing in his manner was rude. Nothing in it was warm. He looked like a man accustomed to receiving half-truths from polite mouths and sorting them by usefulness. "You are newly arrived." "This afternoon." "For a visit?" The question was simple. Lady Octavia answered before Honoria could. "A brief one, I think. Lady Honoria has interests in the neighborhood, though perhaps not of the sort one should encourage without guidance." Honoria's fingers tightened around the key. The Duke noticed the movement. "Interests?" Lady Octavia smiled as if reluctant to mention anything indelicate. "Only a small matter regarding Larkspur Park. There has been talk of the estate changing hands, and Lady Honoria has shown a rather touching attachment to the property. Sentiment may be charming in a young lady, but it can also lead her beyond what is prudent." "I have made no claim in this hall," Honoria said. Her voice remained even. "Nor have I asked for guidance." For the first time, the Duke's attention sharpened. Lady Octavia's smile thinned. "There, you see. Independence sounds admirable until it forgets proportion." The Duke said nothing for a moment. His silence was not empty. It examined the map of discomfort before him, the way Honoria stood without a patron beside her, the way Lady Octavia occupied his house as if she could supply judgment in his absence, the way every servant pretended not to listen. Then a groom arrived with word that the horses had been settled, and the brief hall encounter dissolved into movement. Honoria was taken upstairs by a maid who spoke kindly but nervously. Her chamber overlooked a sweep of lawn descending toward the dark line of trees that hid Larkspur Park. She stood at the window until the maid left, then opened her gloved hand. The old brass key had left a red mark across her palm. By dinner, Brackenhurst had changed its face. Candles burned in silver branches. The long dining room gleamed with polished mahogany, crystal, and restraint. Lady Octavia had gathered several county neighbors at short notice, which meant they had been invited before Honoria arrived or summoned with impressive urgency afterward. Honoria recognized none of them except by type. A baronet's widow with bright eyes. A clergyman's wife who watched every plate. Two gentlemen with estate opinions. A pale girl in rose silk whose mother had clearly dressed her to be noticed by a duke. The girl was introduced as Miss Dorothea Pike, and she smiled at Honoria with a delighted cruelty of someone who had been told she was rising while another woman was falling. Honoria was placed midway down the table, not insultingly low, but not near enough to dignity to be accidental. The Duke sat at the head. Lady Octavia sat where a duchess might have sat if Brackenhurst had won. Conversation began with weather, roads, and London. It moved, as conversation always did when guided by skilled hands, toward property. "There are few estates as well situated as Larkspur," said Mr. Cresswell, one of the gentlemen with opinions. "Small, of course, but neat. If properly joined to Brackenhurst land, it would make admirable sense." "Provided it falls into sensible hands," Lady Octavia replied. "An estate is not a trinket to be purchased because one has fond memories of a nursery." Honoria lifted her water glass and set it down without drinking. Across the table, Miss Dorothea tilted her head. "How romantic to be attached to a house one cannot maintain. I suppose every lady must have a dream, even if she hasn't a household." A small laugh moved around the table, polite enough to deny, cruel enough to wound. Honoria felt heat climb her throat. She did not lower her head. A household is not proved by the number of servants who carry one's plates, she said. No? Miss Dorothea's brows rose. Then by what? By responsibility. The word landed more firmly than Honoria intended. The Duke looked at her. Lady Octavia noticed. Responsibility is precisely the question, she said. There are rumors, Your Grace, that certain parties have been asking after old boundaries, old rights of way, old papers best left in the hands of those equipped to understand them. The Duke's eyes went to Honoria's gloved hand. The key lay hidden inside it. Her pulse did not. You visited the boundary gate this afternoon, he said. It was not a question. I looked at it. After being told not to. After being told guests should not wander. And were you wandering? His tone did not rise. That made it worse. No, Your Grace. I was remembering. Memory is a poor guide in matters of land. Silence touched the table, then spread. Honoria became aware of every candle flame, every white hand at rest near silver, every servant paused behind a chair. Lady Octavia sat very still, triumph contained beneath perfect manners. Miss Dorothea watched as if the evening had finally become entertaining. Honoria could have explained. She could have said that her mother had lived at Larkspur as a ward, that the key was not stolen, that sentiment was not the same as foolishness, that she had not come to beg for scraps of influence from House Wycliffe. But she saw the Duke's expression and understood that explanations offered in a room already prepared to doubt her would only become further evidence of presumption. He had been told a story before she entered. Now every word she spoke would be fitted into it. Some boundaries exist for good reason, the Duke said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to the last chair. A lady in uncertain circumstances would do well not to mistake old acquaintance for present claim. Know your place, Lady Honoria. The room went silent. Truly silent. Even the footman seemed to stop breathing. Honoria felt the sentence strike, not loudly, but deeply, like cold water poured through silk. A lesser pain might have made her answer. A smaller insult might have allowed anger. This one was too public for either. Her mother's key pressed into her palm. Her father's name sat between them like a reduced estate. Lady Octavia's satisfaction shone in the softened corners of her mouth. The Duke looked at Honoria as if he had restored order, not yet understanding what order had cost. Slowly, Honoria pushed back her chair. The sound of wood against carpet was soft, but everyone heard it. She rose. Her face remained calm because pride was all she owned openly in that room. She turned toward the Duke and made a curtsy so deep and exact that no one could call it insolence. I shall, Your Grace. She lifted her eyes only once. He was watching her now with something less certain in his expression, but uncertainty had come too late to spare her. Honoria sat again, and dinner continued because society was skilled at pretending nothing unforgivable had happened when the food was expensive and the offender powerful. She ate what was placed before her. She answered two harmless questions. She smiled once at the clergyman's wife, who looked ashamed on her behalf. When the ladies withdrew, Honoria excused herself as soon as propriety allowed. In her chamber, she did not weep. She removed her gloves, laid the brass key beside the inkstand, and took out the letter she had written in her mind the moment the Duke spoke. Her hand was steady as she addressed Mr. Edmund Voss in London. The message contained only one word beneath the formal salutation. Proceed. By morning, Brackenhurst Hall had learned to whisper without moving its lips. Honoria felt it the moment she descended the staircase in her travelling gown, the same dark blue wool from the day before, brushed and pressed by her own hands until poverty looked like discipline. Two housemaids paused near the lower landing and looked away too quickly. A footman opened the breakfast room door with a careful blankness that told her the servants had heard every word from dinner. Perhaps not the words themselves. Perhaps only the silence after them. In houses like Brackenhurst, silence travelled faster than sound. Lady Octavia sat at the breakfast table beside a silver coffee service, reading a letter she had no need to read. Miss Dorothea Pike was already there, pale and pretty in morning muslin, stirring tea she did not drink. The Duke was absent. Honoria was grateful for that, though the gratitude stung. Lady Octavia looked up. You are leaving us early, Lady Honoria. Yes. Honoria crossed to the sideboard and chose nothing. My business in the neighborhood requires attention. Miss Dorothea lifted her lashes. Business? How very masculine that sounds. Does it? Honoria asked. How unfortunate for business. A small silence followed. It was not victory, but it was enough to make Dorothea's spoon stop in her cup. Lady Octavia folded her letter with elegant precision. My dear, after last night, one might think rest would be wiser than movement. Rest is a luxury for those whose affairs are arranged by others. And are yours arranged? Lady Octavia asked softly. They are being arranged. Honoria curtsied with just enough grace to satisfy etiquette and just enough distance to deny affection. Thank you for your hospitality. Lady Octavia's eyes narrowed by a fraction. You will not wait to take leave of His Grace. His Grace made his opinion plain. Honoria's voice remained level. I would not presume upon more of his time. She left before Lady Octavia could turn courtesy into a leash. In the hall, her small trunk already waited near the door, and the old brass key lay hidden again within her glove. The red mark it had left across her palm had faded, but the memory of its pressure had not. A maid brought her cloak. Honoria thanked her by name because the girl had looked nervous and because kindness cost less than pride while often requiring more courage. Outside, the sky had cleared to a hard, pale blue. Frost silvered the grass along the drive. The hired carriage waited, but beside it stood another vehicle, smaller, darker, and travel-stained from early roads. A gentleman in a sober coat stepped down from it just as Honoria reached the portico. He was thin, grey at the temples, and carried a leather document case close to his side. His bow was not grand, but it was exact. Lady Honoria. Relief struck her so sharply that she nearly closed her eyes. Mr. Voss. I received your instruction at Winchester late last night. Your messenger rode well. Then everything is ready. Everything that can be ready before we take possession. He glanced toward the house, then lowered his voice. Sir Alistair signed the final conveyance before leaving for the coast. The funds have cleared through the trust. There is no legal impediment. Legal. The word was plain and dry, yet to Honoria it sounded almost like music. Not charity. Not permission. Not indulgence from a duke who had mistaken her restraint for weakness. Law. Ink. Signature. Property. Then we shall go there now, she said. The front door opened behind them. Honoria did not turn at once. She knew before anyone spoke that the Duke had come out. The air changed again, as it had in the hall the day before. Mr. Voss bowed more deeply. Your Grace. Adrian Whitecliffe stood at the top of the steps without a hat, his morning coat dark against the stone. His face held none of the public severity of dinner, but it did not yet hold apology either. Lady Honoria, he said. Mr. Voss. You are far from London. Not so far as duty requires, Your Grace. The solicitor's answer was polite enough to be safe and firm enough to be noticed. The Duke's gaze moved from the document case to Honoria's gloved hand. Is something amiss? No, Honoria said. Something is concluded. Lady Octavia appeared behind him in the doorway, suddenly less composed. Concluded. Honoria looked at her then. Yes. Nothing more. She stepped into the carriage before curiosity could become interrogation. Mr. Voss followed in his own vehicle, and the horses turned down the drive toward the old boundary lane. Honoria did not look back until the house had fallen behind a screen of beeches. When she did, she saw the Duke still standing on the steps, a dark figure in a pale mourning, with Lady Octavia beside him like a shadow that wished to be mistaken for guidance. The carriage stopped at the ivy-covered arch. This time, Honoria did not ask permission to descend. The same understeward from the previous day stood near the gate, his face uncertain now that Mr. Voss had arrived with papers and a witness. The newer black lock still hung through the chain, oiled and smug. Honoria took the brass key from her glove. For one trembling instant, she allowed herself to hope that memory might still fit iron. It did not. The key entered halfway and stopped. She tried once, gently. The lock refused her. It has been changed, Mr. Voss said. His voice was calm, but his eyes sharpened. Recently, I would say. The understeward shifted. Honoria turned to him. Who ordered this lock replaced? I do not know, my lady. Did you replace it? No, my lady. Then you will not object to Mr. Voss noting its condition. The young man swallowed. No, my lady. My lady. Not guest. Not wanderer. Something in the title sounded different when spoken beside a gate she had the right to open. Mr. Voss removed a folded paper and then, with almost ceremonial plainness, a smaller iron key newly tagged in ink. Lady Honoria Vale, by final conveyance executed by Sir Alistair Larkspur and witnessed in proper form, Larkspur Park and its attached lands are now yours. This is the present key to the south entrance. The old boundary lock will be addressed once we determine by whose authority it was altered. Honoria took the new key. It was cold. Ugly. Practical. It had none of her mother's warmth, none of the software of years, but it turned when she placed it into the lock. The chain loosened. The gate opened inward with a reluctant groan, and Larkspur Park lay before her in winter quiet. The lane beyond was overgrown at the edges. The house in the distance was smaller than Brackenhurst, its stone paler, its chimneys uneven, its windows catching light as if surprised to be seen. It was not grand enough to intimidate. It was not ruined enough to pity. It waited. Honoria stepped through. No fanfare came. No one applauded. A rook lifted from the trees and vanished toward the fields. Behind her, carriage wheels sounded on the Brackenhurst drive. She turned and saw the Duke approaching on horseback, stopping at a distance proper enough not to intrude and close enough to witness what could no longer be hidden. His eyes moved from the open gate to Mr. Voss, then to Honoria standing on Larkspur soil. Something changed in his face. It was not regret yet. It was the first fracture in certainty. Lady Octavia's carriage appeared farther up the drive, halted behind him. Miss Dorothea's rose-coloured bonnet was visible at the window. Honoria understood then that the county would know before luncheon. It would travel from servant to stable, from stable to village, from village to drawing-room. The woman placed midway down the table last night had entered the neighbouring estate this morning as its mistress. Mr. Voss came to stand beside her. "Shall we inspect the house, my lady?" Honoria looked once at Brackenhurst, then at the Duke. She offered no explanation. He had not asked for truth when it mattered. She would not perform it now for his comfort. "Yes, Mr. Voss," she said. "Let us go home." The word was almost too much. She walked up the lane before it could break in her throat. Behind her, Adrian remained mounted beside the open gate until one of his grooms rode up with a folded paper. It was the warning letter Lady Octavia had placed before him the previous evening, the one suggesting that Honoria meant to scheme her way into Larkspur. He opened it again, though he already knew its contents. This time, he did not read the accusation. He studied the hand. The curve of the capital letters. The pressure of the ink. The small, elegant hook at the end of every line. Slowly, his fingers tightened around the paper. The handwriting was not unfamiliar. It was only disguised. The Duke of Caldermere remained beside the open gate long after Lady Honoria Vale disappeared up the lane toward Larkspur Park. His horse shifted beneath him, restless in the cold, but Adrian did not move. The warning letter lay unfolded in his gloved hand, its ink strokes dark against the paper. He had read it twice the previous evening and had allowed its accusations to shape his judgment before he ever asked Lady Honoria a single honest question. That fact sat in him now with a weight no rank could soften. The letter had warned him that she was meddling in estate affairs beyond her station, that she had been seen asking after old rights of way, that she had sought to influence Sir Alistair Larkspur in the matter of the sale. It had not said anything plainly enough to be challenged. It had only suggested, implied, arranged suspicion like furniture in a room until any decent mind might stumble into it. Adrian knew that method. He had seen it used in Parliament, in clubs, in family councils where inheritance and pride mattered more than truth. What troubled him was not merely the phrasing. It was the handwriting. The elegant hooks, the controlled slant, the faint pressure at the start of each line. A disguised hand was never entirely new. It carried its owner in small betrayals. He folded the letter and rode back toward Brackenhurst at a measured pace. By the time he reached the stable yard, word had already moved faster than hoofbeats. A groom took the horse with eyes lowered. Two maids stopped speaking when Adrian crossed the side passage. In the breakfast room, Miss Dorothea Pike's laughter cut off like a ribbon snipped by shears. Lady Octavia sat beside the coffee service with the calm of a woman who had decided surprise was vulgar. "Your Grace," she said. "You have been to the Boundary." "I have." Adrian placed the folded letter on the table. "You told me Lady Honoria intended to interfere with the sale of Larkspur Park." Lady Octavia lifted her brows. "Did I? I believe I said her attachment to the place was imprudent. You gave me this." It came from a reliable concern. "From whom?" Her fingers touched the rim of her cup. "My dear Duke, people write when they are alarmed. They do not always wish their names paraded before the county. I did not ask what they wished. I asked who wrote it." Miss Dorothea went very still. Lady Octavia smiled at the girl, then dismissed her with a glance smooth enough to appear maternal. Dorothea rose and murmured something about a headache. Once the door closed, Lady Octavia let her softness harden. "You are displeased because Lady Honoria has made a scene." "She did not make one. She purchased an estate after dining under your roof and allowing everyone to believe she was merely a guest. Did she owe me knowledge of her private business? When that business touches your boundary, your tenants, your future convenience, yes." The answer came too quickly. There it was. Not concern for propriety. Not fear for a young lady's reputation. Convenience. Adrian looked toward the window, beyond the lawns, toward the hidden line where Brackenhurst ended and Larkspur began. "Who changed the lock on the boundary gate?" Lady Octavia's face did not change, but her hand stilled. "I cannot be expected to know every small action of estate staff. You have been giving instructions in my absence. Someone had to preserve order. Order is not the same as ownership." Her eyes flashed. "Only for a moment. You may find, Your Grace, that allowing sentimental women to meddle with land will make order difficult to preserve." Adrian took up the letter. "I am going to see Sir Alistair." "Today?" "Now. The man is leaving Hampshire. He is embarrassed, indebted, and eager to excuse himself. He'll say whatever protects his pride. Then I shall listen carefully." He left before she could answer. The journey to Sir Alistair Larkspur's temporary lodging took less than 40 minutes by carriage, yet Adrian felt each minute as a delayed reckoning. The old baronet had taken rooms at a modest inn near the posting road, a practical choice for a man preparing to leave the county before sympathy became pity. Adrian found him in a private parlour with trunks stacked near the wall and a walking stick across his knees. Sir Alistair was thin, white-haired, and tired, but his eyes were clear. He rose with effort. "Your Grace, I would offer a grander welcome, but grandeur and I have parted company. Do not rise on my account. I have had a lifetime of rising for dukes. One more will not ruin me." The faint humour had dignity in it. Adrian waited until the inn servant withdrew. "I have come about Larkspur Park." "Then you are a day late to buy it." "I am aware." "Are you?" Sir Alistair studied him. "Forgive me. That was ungracious. I had assumed Brackenhurst would be pleased enough. The land has not gone to speculators. It has gone to Lady Honoria Vale." "Yes." "Was there pressure?" Sir Alistair's mouth tightened. "There was debt. There was age. There was my own foolish management, which is less romantic than pressure but more common." "From Lady Honoria?" "Good heavens, no." The old man sounded offended. "She wrote through Mr. Edmund Voss. Every offer was proper. Every figure fair. She asked first whether the existing leases might be honoured. That was her first concern, Your Grace. Not the drawing room. Not the stables. Not whether the south bedrooms caught morning light. The leases." Adrian was silent. Sir Alistair leaned back, breathing slowly. "Had I sold to the gentleman Lady Octavia favoured, 3 tenant families would have been gone by Michaelmas. The old orchard would have been cleared. The south lane would have been closed. I know what people say of men like me when we fail. They think we become too desperate to care. Perhaps I was. Lady Honoria was not. Lady Octavia favoured another buyer. She spoke often of preserving the natural unity of the estates. Sir Alistair's smile was weary. Natural unity has a pleasant sound when one means swallowing a smaller neighbour. Adrian felt something cold pass through him. Did Lady Honoria know Lady Octavia opposed the sale? I do not know. She knew someone did. Mr. Voss mentioned delays with keys, access, small inventories, boundary papers requested twice and misplaced twice. Annoyances, but not accidents. The boundary gate lock was changed. Sir Alistair frowned. It should not have been. That passage has existed longer than either house cares to remember. The old brass key belonged once to Mrs. Vale, Lady Honoria's mother. She was my mother's ward for a time. A quiet child. Sad at first. Happier at Larkspur. The room seemed to still around that simple history. Adrian saw again Honoria's gloved hand closing at dinner, the restraint in her face when he had spoken of place as if she had none. He had mistaken memory for presumption because Lady Octavia had offered him the mistake and he had been proud enough to accept it. She paid fairly, he asked, though he already knew the answer. More fairly than I deserved. Sir Alistair looked directly at him. If you have heard otherwise, Your Grace, you have heard a lie. Adrian returned to Brackenhurst as the afternoon light thinned over the fields. He did not go first to Lady Octavia. He went to his study, locked the door, and opened the writing drawer where household correspondence had been placed during his absence. Lady Octavia's notes lay bundled by date, each one written in the elegant hand she used when asking for carriage arrangements, guest lists, flowers, candles, permissions. He placed the warning letter beside them. The disguise was clever. It was not clever enough. The same hook appeared at the end of the capital L. The same pressure darkened the downward stroke. The same narrow spacing crowded the final line, as if the writer disliked leaving room for contradiction. Adrian stood over the papers for a long moment. He had been used. Worse, he had been willing to be used because the story placed him where he was most comfortable, as guardian of order, judge of claims, master of boundaries. Then Lady Honoria had stood in his dining room, hurt and steady, and he had given the room permission to despise her. He rang for his secretary. "Bring me a card." The man obeyed at once. Adrian took up his pen, then stopped. An apology written too quickly could become another form of command. He chose the simplest formal line. The Duke of Caldermere requests the honour of calling upon Lady Honoria Vale at Larkspur Park at her convenience. He sealed it himself and sent it by a groom with instructions to wait for an answer, not demand one. The reply came near dusk on a small card, cleanly written, each letter steady. His Grace may call as a neighbour, not as a judge. Adrian read it once. Then again. For the first time since returning to Brackenhurst, he did not feel insulted by correction. He felt that he had earned it. Adrian Whitecliffe had faced furious ministers, creditors with smiling mouths, and noblemen who could lie without blinking, yet the closed front door of Larkspur Park made him hesitate. It was not grand enough to intimidate him. That was the trouble. Brackenhurst declared power in every column and polished acre, but Larkspur stood before him with peeling paint on the shutters, ivy tugging at the stone, and pale curtains newly shaken free of dust. It looked neglected, not defeated. It looked like a house waiting to discover whether its new mistress would be allowed to breathe inside it. He had come precisely at the hour Lady Honoria's card permitted, neither early enough to command nor late enough to dismiss. His carriage waited at the curve of the drive. His hat was in his hand. A maid opened the door after a pause, young, freckled, and plainly uncertain whether a duke should be made to wait. "His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere," Adrian said, offering his card though she could not possibly mistake him. "Lady Honoria is expecting me." The maid took the card with both hands as if it might burn her. "Yes, Your Grace. Please wait here." She looked toward the drawing-room, then added in a rush, "Mrs. Bell is with her ladyship." "That is proper," Adrian said. The maid's shoulders eased by an inch. He had not intended the words as kindness, but he saw that they landed as such. Larkspur's entrance hall smelled faintly of lemon soap, old paper, and cold ashes. A crack ran across one marble tile near the stairs. 2 portraits had been removed, leaving pale rectangles on the wall where old dust had framed older pride. He stood beneath them and understood, more sharply than he wished to, that Lady Honoria had not purchased comfort. She had purchased responsibility. When the maid opened the drawing-room door, Honoria was standing near a writing table with a ledger open before her and an elderly woman seated near the window, knitting with deliberate calm. The housekeeper, he presumed. Honoria wore a plain grey gown that made no argument for beauty, which somehow made her composure more difficult to look away from. The room had been hastily made habitable. A fire had been lit. The furniture wore holland covers pushed aside only where needed. Dust still silvered the mirror frame. On the writing table lay the old brass key. Adrian saw it before he meant to. Honoria saw him see it. "Your Grace," she said. "Lady Honoria." He bowed. Not the shallow inclination one offered at dinner. A proper bow. The housekeeper lowered her knitting and watched him with the fearless suspicion of a woman too old to be impressed by rank. "Mrs. Bell has agreed to remain," Honoria said. "I assumed you would find that suitable." "I do." "Good. I prefer there be no room for invention." He accepted the rebuke because it was deserved. "Nor do I." Honoria gestured to a chair. "As a neighbor, then." He sat only after she did. The housekeeper resumed knitting, needles whispering in the corner like a quiet metronome. For a moment, no one spoke. Adrian had prepared careful sentences on the drive. They abandoned him now because the room did not require elegance. It required truth. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes." The simplicity of her answer struck harder than accusation would have done. He looked at her hands. They were folded lightly in her lap, but not at rest. "I spoke without knowing enough. I allowed another person's implication to become my judgment. That was unjust. It was. I am sorry." Honoria's gaze did not lower. "Do you mean that you are sorry you were misinformed, or sorry for what your words did after you spoke them?" Adrian went still. In Parliament, such a question would have been called a trap. Here, it was a door he either had courage enough to enter or not. "Both," he said. "But the second matters more." "It does." Her voice was steady, though not cold. That made it worse. "Your Grace gave society permission to despise me." The words entered the room and stayed there. Mrs. Bell's needle stopped for one beat, then continued. Adrian felt the weight of every face at his dinner table, every polite laugh, every servant who had heard enough to carry the wound below stairs. He had imagined himself correcting presumption. Instead, he had lent his rank to cruelty. "I know," he said. "No," Honoria replied. "You know that you were wrong. You do not yet know what it is to have a room decide you are small because the greatest man in it found that convenient." He accepted that too. It cost him less than it had cost her. "Then teach me what repair is possible." Something flickered in her face. Surprise, perhaps. Distrust, certainly. Repair is not the same as regret. No, and regret is not the same as respect. "No," he said again. "But it may be where I begin, if you permit it." Honoria looked toward the covered windows, where the winter light lay thin across the floor. Permit is an interesting word from a duke. I am learning that it should have been my first one. The corner of her mouth moved, not into a smile, but away from bitterness. It was the smallest mercy she could have offered, and she seemed annoyed with herself for offering it. Adrian allowed his gaze to move to the brass key. "Sir Alistair told me the key belonged to your mother." Honoria's hand tightened once, then released. He remembered correctly. She lived here. As a ward. Her parents died when she was young. Sir Alistair's mother took her in for several years. Honoria reached for the key but did not lift it. She rarely spoke of those years directly. My mother was not a woman who asked pity to sit beside her. But when she mentioned Larkspur, her voice changed. She said the blue room looked east. She said the orchard wall held warmth after sunset. She said the boundary gate was where she learned that a place could open instead of close. Adrian listened without moving. He had thought of land as acreage, leases, drainage, timber, access, and power. Honoria spoke of it as shelter without making it sentimental. That was the difference he had failed to imagine. "And your father?" he asked carefully. "My father loved my mother. He did not understand her grief, but he respected it. When she died, the key came to me. I was 16. Her eyes rested on the old brass for a moment. After my father's death, everyone spoke of what was practical. Debts. Settlements. Relations. Invitations that became fewer each year. I kept the key because it was useless. No one tried to take it from me." The restraint in that sentence nearly undid him. "Until now," he said. Honoria looked at him. "Until yesterday. He deserved that. The boundary lock was changed without my order. But within your world." "Yes." He did not defend himself. "I intend to discover who ordered it. Lady Octavia will say it was a household matter. Then the household will answer. And if the household answers in a way that embarrasses Brackenhurst, then Brackenhurst will be embarrassed." For the first time, Mrs. Bell looked up with something that almost resembled approval. Honoria studied him as if the promise were a coin she expected to find false. "You say that now." "I say it here, in your house, where I have less authority than I had yesterday. You still have more than almost anyone in Hampshire. That is why I must be more careful than almost anyone in Hampshire." Silence followed. It was not comfortable, but it was no longer empty. The fire shifted in the grate, and a small fall of ash whispered down. Adrian rose slowly. "I would like to have the boundary gate repaired. Properly. At my expense, since the wrong appears to have originated from my side." Honoria stood as well. "No," he stopped. "No. Not if it is charity. It is not. Not if it is apology disguised as improvement. Then name the terms." She looked toward the key, then back at him. "We will determine who changed the lock first. Then the person responsible will bear the cost. If Brackenhurst is responsible, Brackenhurst may pay. If Larkspur is responsible, Larkspur will pay. I will not have my first act as mistress of this estate be accepting favors from the man who publicly reduced me." Adrian bowed his head. "Fair. Fairness is not generosity, Your Grace. It is the minimum." "Then I shall begin with the minimum and hope to deserve more." The words came before calculation could smooth them. Honoria heard the difference. Her guarded expression did not soften, but something in the room shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. A possibility, narrow as the old lane between the estates. He took his leave with the same care with which he had entered. At the door, he turned back once. Honoria stood beside the writing table, the brass key near her hand, the house still dusty and cold around her, yet somehow already less abandoned than it had been an hour before. "Lady Honoria," he said. "Yes? I was wrong about your place." Her fingers touched the key. "That remains to be proven." He bowed. "Then I will not ask you to believe it before I prove it." Outside, the air had sharpened. As his carriage turned down the lane, a sound cracked from the direction of the house. Not loud. Not violent enough to harm. But sudden. Adrian ordered the driver to stop. A maid cried out. By the time he reached the side entrance, Honoria was already there, standing before a broken drawing-room window with a stone on the floor and a folded note beside it. She did not look frightened. That frightened him more. She bent, picked up the note by its clean edge, and read the words without trembling. "No lady buys what she cannot defend." The note lay in Honoria's hand like a challenge written by someone too cowardly to sign a name. "No lady buys what she cannot defend." The words were neat, blockish, and deliberately common, as if the writer had tried to make even malice anonymous. Broken glass glittered beneath the drawing-room window, scattered over the worn rug and the floorboards Mrs. Bell had spent the morning scrubbing. The stone itself was no larger than a clenched fist, wrapped once in coarse twine to hold the folded paper. It had done damage enough to frighten the household, but not enough to injure anyone, That calculation made the act uglier, not less so. It had been meant to send a message. It had been meant to tell Honoria that walls, titles, and deeds were all very fine until someone decided to test whether she could stand alone inside them. Behind her, the young maid who had opened the door for the Duke earlier had gone white around the mouth. "I am sorry, my lady. I was just setting the tray down. I didn't see who threw it." Honoria turned at once. "Mary, look at me." The girl obeyed with visible effort. "You did nothing wrong. No one blames you. But the glass, my lady, and the rug, and if Mrs. Bell thinks I should have been quicker, Mrs. Bell will think you should sit down before you drop that tray." The housekeeper appeared at the doorway with a shawl over one arm and a face as stern as a parish monument. And she'd be right. Honoria took the tea tray from Mary before the girl could protest. "Sit by the fire for a moment. Breathe slowly. The window can be repaired. A frightened servant is a more urgent matter." Mary sank into a chair, mortified and grateful at once. Only then did Honoria look toward the side entrance, where Adrian Whitecliffe stood just outside the threshold. His hand rested on the doorframe, but he had not crossed into the room. His expression had gone cold in a way that no longer seemed aimed at her. "May I enter?" he asked. The question was so simple that it unsettled her more than command would have done. Yesterday, he would have walked in as if every doorway in Hampshire owed him passage. Today, with glass on her floor and insult in her hand, he waited. Honoria glanced at Mrs. Bell, then back to him. "You may." He stepped in slowly, careful of the glass. "Was anyone hurt?" "No good." The word was quiet, but something in his shoulders altered. Relief first. Anger after. He looked at Mary, then softened his voice. "You saw nothing?" Mary shook her head. "No, Your Grace. Only the sound. It came from outside, toward the south lawn, I think." "Thank you. That's helpful." The girl stared as if she had not expected a duke to thank her. Honoria noticed. So did he. Adrian turned to the broken window and then to the floor. "Do not touch anything more than necessary. I would like the position of the stone and glass remembered." Honoria lifted the folded note. "I have already read it." "Of course." He accepted the correction without defense. "Will you allow me to see it?" She gave it to him because withholding it would serve pride, not truth. His eyes moved across the words once, then again. No visible shock crossed his face. That was telling. He had expected escalation. Perhaps not this form, but something. "This was thrown from outside the south lawn," he said. "That direction leads toward the old boundary wall and the Brackenhurst tenant lane." "You are certain?" "Certain enough to be troubled." Honoria looked toward the window. Beyond the torn curtain, the lawn sloped toward a line of hedges and winter trees. On the far side lay the land that belonged to him. "Then your side of the boundary has become very interested in mine." "So it seems." He folded the note with care and placed it on the writing table beside the brass key. He did not touch the key. Honoria saw the restraint and hated that she was grateful for it. "I will send men to search the lane." No, Adrian turned back to her. "No? Not men sent by Brackenhurst to search Larkspur while I wait in a drawing room beside a broken window. That was not what I intended. It is what it would become." Mrs. Bell's knitting needles were absent now, but her eyes were sharp enough to replace them. Honoria lifted her chin. "This is my estate. If the lane is to be inspected, I will be present. The ground may be wet, and there may be glass near the shrubbery. Then I shall wear sturdier shoes. Lady Honoria, Your Grace." Her tone stopped him before the title became a protest. Silence pressed between them. Adrian looked at the broken window, the shaken maid, the note on the table, and finally at Honoria. Whatever argument he had prepared faded before it left his mouth. "Very well," he said. "Mrs. Bell will come with us." The housekeeper snorted softly. "I should think so." 10 minutes later, Honoria crossed the south lawn with a cloak over her grey gown, Mrs. Bell at her left, and the Duke walking a respectful pace to her right. The air had turned colder. Damp grass darkened the hem of Honoria's skirt, and the wind carried the mineral smell of frost waiting for evening. Behind them, Mary had been left by the kitchen fire with sweet tea and strict orders not to apologize to any living soul. The thought steadied Honoria. Fear wanted to make everything narrow. It wanted to make a woman think only of herself. She would not give the anonymous writer that victory. Adrian said little as they walked. That helped. His silence was no longer the polished silence of a judge. It had become the concentration of a man measuring ground, distance, access. Near the shrubbery below the broken window, he crouched without touching the earth. The stone struck from this angle, he said. Thrown by hand. Most likely. From there. He nodded toward a gap between two overgrown laurels at the edge of the lawn. Someone came through the hedge. From Brackenhurst land? Honoria asked. From the tenant lane that runs beside it. Would a tenant risk such a thing? A tenant might, if ordered, paid, frightened, or deceived. That is a wide net. It will narrow. They passed through the gap in the laurels. Beyond it, the boundary wall ran low and old, built of flint and weather-stained brick. A small service gate stood half-hidden beneath ivy. Its latch was closed, but fresh mud marked the ground before it. Adrian bent, studying the imprint. Boots, he said. A man's? Likely. Not a groom's riding boot. A laborious boot, or someone who wished to look like one. Honoria looked at the gate. Does this open to Brackenhurst? To the tenant lane, yes. It should be locked from both sides. He took a step closer, then stopped and looked at her. May I examine it? The question warmed her despite herself. You may examine a gate, Your Grace. I have no sentimental attachment to that latch. Mrs. Bell made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been approval. Adrian tested the gate lightly. It shifted. Not open, not secure. He looked down and found a narrow scrape along the edge of the lock plate. It was opened recently. Forced? Honoria asked. No. A key was used, or something very like one. He reached toward the ivy, then paused as a thorn caught near his glove. Careful, Honoria said before she meant to. He looked back at her. For one brief second, the cold inquiry left his face. I am. It was foolish that two small words could disturb her. Honoria turned away first. Mrs. Bell moved closer to the gate and pointed with the practical authority of a woman who had supervised pantries, servants, and foolish gentlemen for decades. There, Your Grace. Something caught under the hinge. Adrian drew it free with 2 fingers. It was a tiny flake of red sealing wax, pressed thin and broken along one edge. A partial impression remained. Not enough for a full crest. Enough for a curve of a letter and a small spray of laurel. Honoria saw him recognize it. His face went very still. You know that mark, she said. He closed his hand around the fragment, then opened it again as if refusing secrecy. I believe I do. Whose? He met her eyes. This time, he did not shield her with vagueness. Lady Octavia uses red wax with a laurel device for household notes when she wishes them acted upon quickly. The wind moved through the ivy. Somewhere beyond the wall, a horse stamped in the Brackenhurst lane. Honoria looked back toward Larkspur, at the broken window visible through bare branches, then at the small red proof in the Duke's palm. The threat had come from a shadow, but the shadow now had shape. Adrian's voice lowered. Lady Honoria, what do you wish done? No one had asked her that after the dinner. No one had asked her at the gate. No one had asked when the world decided she was a woman to be managed. For a moment, she did not answer because the question itself felt like a door opening. Then she drew her cloak tighter and looked toward Brackenhurst. We begin by finding who carried the order, she said. Then we find who gave it. By the time the county assembly was held at Hartmere House 3 evenings later, Honoria had learned that scandal did not need proof in order to dress for dinner. It arrived scented, gloved, and smiling, with feathers in its hair and malice behind its fan. The invitation had come from Mrs. Wilton, wife of the local magistrate, who prided herself on gathering every respectable neighbour within 8 miles whenever news had made respectability uncertain. Honoria had considered refusing. Mrs. Bell had advised attending before a treat could be mistaken for guilt. Mr. Voss, who had remained in the neighbourhood to examine Larkspur papers, had agreed. The Duke had sent no command, no warning, and no promise. Only a small note by groom that morning. If you attend, you will not stand alone unless you wish it. Honoria had read the line twice, then folded it away without answering. She chose a gown of deep green silk, not new, but well cut enough to remind the county that reduced circumstances had not erased breeding. The old brass key hung from a dark ribbon beneath her glove, hidden at her wrist. She had not meant to bring it. Then she had imagined Lady Octavia smile and fastened it there anyway. Hertmere House was smaller than Brackenhurst but brighter, its assembly room lit by candles in wall sconces and a chandelier that trembled whenever carriages passed outside. Music moved politely from the far end of the room. Voices softened when Honoria entered. Not stopped. That would have been too honest. They softened, turned, and resumed with her name carefully omitted. Mrs. Wilton greeted her with a squeeze of the hand that meant either courage or curiosity. Lady Honoria, how pleased we are. You must know everyone is eager to see how Larkspur is faring. Then everyone is kind to think of old houses, Honoria replied. Old houses often recover when people stop discussing their weaknesses and begin repairing their roofs. Mrs. Wilton blinked, then laughed a little too late. Across the room, Lady Octavia stood beside Miss Dorothea Pike and 2 matrons who collected misfortune the way others collected porcelain. Dorothea wore pale blue and a look of tender concern. Lady Octavia wore grey satin and no visible triumph. That made Honoria more wary. Triumph could be careless. Lady Octavia's restraint had been polished. The Duke arrived 10 minutes later, and the room corrected itself around him. Men who had been speaking loudly lowered their voices. Mothers angled daughters. Lady Octavia's mouth softened into welcome, but Adrian did not go to her first. He crossed the room to Honoria with the calm inevitability of a man who understood that every eye would follow and had decided to use that fact. Lady Honoria, he said. Your Grace. She curtsied. He bowed. Not too deeply for society. Deeply enough for her to recognize intention. I hope Larkspur suffered no further trouble after the window. The question was ordinary. The mention was not. Several heads turned. Honoria understood at once that he had placed the threat into public air without dramatizing it. No further trouble, she said. Mrs. Bell has intimidated the remaining windows into better behavior. His mouth almost moved. Then Larkspur is in capable hands. It was a small sentence. In that room, from him, it became a shield. Lady Octavia drifted nearer before it could settle too firmly. How comforting to hear your Grace speak so warmly of Larkspur. One hopes warmth will not interfere with prudence. Prudence rarely suffers from truth, Adrian said. Only from its delay. Dorothea gave a little laugh. Truth can be so difficult, can't it? Especially when everyone has heard a different version. Then we must prefer the version that can bear examination, Honoria said. Dorothea's eyes brightened. How brave you are to say so. The first dance began. Honoria did not dance. Neither did the Duke. That itself became talk. She moved toward a table where lemonade had been placed in cut glass bowls, wishing for one quiet minute. She did not receive it. A folded paper lay beside the cups, half tucked beneath a napkin, positioned so that anyone reaching for a glass might see it. The paper had no seal. A woman beside Honoria noticed it first, then pretended not to. Dorothea noticed next and did not pretend at all. What is this? She asked, lifting it delicately. How odd. Lady Octavia turned with practiced concern. Dorothea, perhaps you should not handle stray papers. But it mentions Larkspur. That was enough. The nearest conversations thinned. Dorothea unfolded the paper. Her eyes widened with performance so skillful that Honoria nearly admired it. Oh, I shouldn't read this. Then don't, Honoria said. Dorothea's cheeks colored prettily. It says Sir Alistair was not paid only in money. The room altered. Music continued, but no one heard it properly. A gentleman coughed. A woman looked down at her fan. The sentence had not named a sin. It had done worse. It had left an open space for every listener to fill with something uglier than ink. Honoria stood very still. She felt the old familiar narrowing. A room deciding what she was before she spoke. Lady Octavia's face arranged itself into sorrow. My dear Lady Honoria, how dreadful. Anonymous cruelty is beneath contempt. Yet remarkably well placed, Honoria said. Dorothea lowered the paper. I only read what was written. Don't blame me. I blame the hand that wrote it and the mind that placed it. A murmur rose. Adrian had already begun moving toward her, his face controlled but his eyes cold. Honoria saw the protective instinct in the set of his shoulders. She also saw what would happen if he spoke first. The county would say a duke had rescued a woman too compromised to answer for herself. She lifted one hand, barely more than a breath of motion. He stopped. It was such a small obedience. It changed something in her chest. Honoria turned to the room. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. That made them listen harder. If I were a man, would prudence be called corruption? Silence fell with the force of a dropped curtain. Dorothea's lips parted. Lady Octavia's eyes sharpened. Honoria continued. If a gentleman purchased land through a solicitor, paid a fair price, honored existing leases, and prevented tenants from being displaced, would anyone ask whether his money was the only thing exchanged? Or would you call him sensible? No one answered. Honoria looked from face to face, not pleading, not smiling. My error, it seems, was not improper conduct. It was conducting business while female, unprotected, and expected to remain grateful for whatever corner society left me. The silence deepened. It no longer belonged to her humiliation. It belonged to their discomfort. Adrian stepped forward only after she had finished. Sir Alistair Larkspur sold his estate willingly, he said, his voice carrying cleanly over the room. Mr. Edmund Voss handled the conveyance properly. The price was fair, the funds lawful, and Lady Honoria's first written condition concerned the protection of existing tenants. Anyone suggesting otherwise is not mistaken. They are lying. The word struck harder because a duke seldom needed one so plain. Mrs. Wilton turned scarlet. One of the gentlemen near the fireplace bowed his head as if he wished to vanish into his cravat. Dorothea folded the paper badly, her fingers clumsy now. Lady Octavia recovered first. Your Grace is admirably decisive. Yet surely you cannot mean to accuse anyone here of authoring such vulgarity. Adrian looked at the anonymous letter in Dorothea's hand. I mean to discover who benefits from it. Lady Octavia smiled. How fortunate for Lady Honoria to have your interest. Honoria felt the trap. Pity could be made from protection if handled by cruel hands. She answered before the Duke could. I had facts before I had His Grace's interest. I am grateful for truth wherever it is spoken, but my reputation does not exist by permission of any gentleman. This time the silence was different. Not warm. Not forgiving. But alert. A few faces changed, not enough to be friendship, enough to be doubt. Doubt was a beginning. The musicians faltered at the end of the dance. Conversation resumed in broken pieces. Dorothea withdrew behind her mother. Lady Octavia crossed the room to retrieve a cup she did not drink. Adrian came to Honoria's side, stopping at a proper distance. You were magnificent, he said quietly. Honoria did not look at him at once. Her heart was still beating too hard. I was necessary. That does not make it less magnificent. She glanced at him then, and for one unguarded instant, the room seemed less crowded. Then she saw Lady Octavia watching from the mirror above the mantel. The older woman's expression held no defeat. Only calculation. Later, near the card-room door, Lady Octavia leaned close to Dorothea, her voice too low for most guests. Honoria did not hear it. Adrian did. Then Lady Octavia murmured, "We shall take the key from her." Adrian heard Lady Octavia's murmur as clearly as if she had spoken across the assembly room. We shall take the key from her. The words followed him back to Brackenhurst like a bell tolling under polite conversation. He said nothing to Honoria before she left Hartmere House, not because he had nothing to say, but because the corridor outside the card room had too many listening ears and too many painted smiles waiting to feed upon any sign of intimacy. He only bowed when her carriage was brought round, and she inclined her head with the composure of a woman who had survived the room but not forgotten it. The next morning, a note arrived from Lady Octavia requesting his presence in the Brackenhurst study before luncheon. Requesting was not the word she had used, of course. She had written that a matter concerning the dignity of his house required immediate attention. Adrian almost smiled at the phrasing. Dignity had become her favourite curtain. It covered a remarkable number of windows. He went anyway. The study was the most private room at Brackenhurst, lined with estate ledgers, maps, and locked cabinets of old correspondence. Lady Octavia stood beside the central table with Miss Dorothea Pike and Mrs. Pike near the hearth. His steward, Mr. Rawlins, waited by the door, pale with discomfort. On the table lay a narrow brass object upon a folded cloth. Adrian knew it before Lady Octavia spoke. The old boundary key. For one moment, every other sound left the room. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Lady Octavia's face held grave sorrow, the kind society women wore when they had arranged the disaster they were pretending to regret. "It was found this morning in the lower cabinet, Your Grace. The cabinet where copies of old estate plans are kept." Mr. Rawlins swallowed. "My assistant found it while bringing up the south boundary file." "Your assistant?" Adrian said. "Not you." "No, Your Grace." Dorothea looked at the key with wide eyes. "How dreadful. After everything said last night, one hoped the matter might be settled." Adrian did not answer her. He looked at Lady Octavia. "And you believe this key belongs to Lady Honoria? Everyone saw her wear a ribbon at her wrist last night. Several noticed the shape beneath her glove. And you yourself saw her interest in the old gate. Interest is not theft." "No. But possession may be trespass." Lady Octavia turned slightly so that the others could hear her clearly. If she entered Brackenhurst land to reach this cabinet, or if she used some old passage to obtain information about estate boundaries, then sentiment is no longer merely charming. It is dangerous. Adrian looked at the cabinet. Its lock had not been broken. The carpet before it had no scuffed thread. The study window was latched from within. A staged discovery, then. Not even a clumsy one. A careful one. Yet careful traps were most dangerous when sprung in front of witnesses, and Lady Octavia had chosen hers well. The steward. Dorothea. Mrs. Pike. Enough mouths to carry the story, not enough minds to question it. "Send to Larkspur," Adrian said. "Ask Lady Honoria to come." Lady Octavia's brows lifted. "Here? Here? Surely that will distress her. Then she may refuse." His tone ended the argument. Honoria arrived an hour later in a dark walking gown and a bonnet trimmed with black ribbon. Mrs. Bell accompanied her, square-shouldered and unimpressed by Brackenhurst grandeur. Honoria entered the study, saw the people gathered, then saw the key. Colour left her face for half a second. Only half. Then she crossed the room without haste and stopped before the table. "That is mine." The honesty unsettled Dorothea, whose prepared expression faltered. Lady Octavia leaned into sympathy. "My dear, no one wishes to accuse you hastily. You gathered witnesses before sending for me." Honoria did not look at her. "That is not hesitation." Adrian felt the quiet blow of the sentence. He deserved part of it simply for allowing this room to exist. "Lady Honoria," he said, "the key was found in the estate cabinet. Then someone placed it there. You deny entering this study?" Dorothea asked. "Miss Pike," Adrian said softly. "You are not conducting this conversation." Dorothea flushed. Honoria's eyes remained on the key. "I have never entered this room before today." Lady Octavia sighed. "And yet the key is here. So it appears. Beside plans of the boundary you have been so eager to discuss." Honoria turned then, and the full force of her attention settled on Lady Octavia. I discussed a gate. You have made it into a crime. The room went still. Adrian saw the moment Lady Octavia shifted tactics. She did not press harder. She softened. Lady Honoria, this can be contained if you are reasonable. His Grace need not make the matter public. The key can be surrendered. The boundary can be closed. Larkspur and Brackenhurst may come to a sensible understanding. There it was. Not justice. Surrender. Honoria looked at Adrian. Is that why I was brought here? No, the answer came too quickly, but not falsely. He stepped closer to the table. I will not ask you to surrender anything. Lady Octavia's gaze sharpened. Your Grace, caution is not cruelty. Until the matter is examined, surely the key should not remain in disputed hands. The old instinct rose in him before he could stop it. The instinct of the master of a great house, trained to quiet scandal, contain evidence, keep order in a room before truth made it messy. He looked at the key, then at the witnesses, then at Honoria. Perhaps, he said carefully, the key might be placed on the table for examination while we determine how it came here. Honoria did not move. The words had been milder than Lady Octavia's demand. They had not been enough. Adrian knew it the instant he saw her face. Not anger first. Hurt. Quiet, controlled hurt that he had taught her to hide from him. It is on the table already, Your Grace. I mean only that it should remain visible. Visible to whom? To all present. So everyone may watch while my mother's last keepsake is treated as evidence against me. Silence opened. Mrs. Bell's expression hardened by the window. Mr. Rawlins stared at the carpet. Adrian felt the failure settle, immediate and unmistakable. He had meant to preserve fairness. He had preserved the arrangement of accusation. Honoria reached for the key. Lady Octavia spoke sharply. Lady Honoria, I would advise against touching it. Honoria's hand stopped above the brass, not because she obeyed, but because the room had shown itself too plainly. You may examine a lock, Your Grace, she said, her voice low. You may not put my mother's memory on trial. The sentence struck him in the center of the chest. She took the key and held it, not hidden now, but openly in her gloved palm. I will answer any proper question through Mr. Voss. I will not stand in a duke's study while ladies who despise me pretend concern for Brackenhurst honor. Dorothea gasped. Lady Octavia's cheeks colored. Adrian did not stop Honoria when she curtsied. He had no right to. At the door, she paused, not looking back. Yesterday you asked what I wished done. Today, I know the answer. I wish not to be protected by anyone who still finds suspicion more convenient than trust. Then she left with Mrs. Bell beside her. The room remained silent after the door closed. Lady Octavia recovered first. Painful, but revealing. Adrian turned on her. Yes, he said. It was. She seemed not to hear the danger in his voice. You see how quickly she becomes theatrical when pressed. I saw a woman asked to prove innocence in a room arranged for her guilt. Lady Octavia went still. Adrian looked at Mr. Rawlins. Who has a key to that cabinet? The steward cleared his throat. You, Your Grace. Myself. And a duplicate held for household administration during your absence. Held by whom? Mr. Rawlins looked miserable. Lady Octavia, Your Grace. The color left Dorothea's face. Lady Octavia gave a small laugh. For convenience only. Convenience, Adrian repeated. He walked to the cabinet and examined the lock. No damage. No splintered wood. No force plate. Whoever had placed Honoria's key inside had opened the cabinet properly. Then he saw it, tucked near the hinge where the polished wood met shadow. A fleck of red sealing wax, crushed nearly flat. He lifted it with the corner of a paper knife and placed it on the table. A partial laurel impression remained. The same device from the boundary lane. The same hand behind the note. The same elegance disguised as order. Adrian looked at Lady Octavia, and for the first time since childhood, the woman who had managed half of Hampshire's drawing room seemed to understand that a duke's silence could turn against her. He folded the forged warning letter from his pocket and placed it beside the wax. Then he rang the bell. "Send for my secretary," he told the footman who appeared. "And tell the grooms no one is to leave Brackenhurst with household correspondence until I have seen it." Lady Octavia's lips parted. "You cannot mean to treat me as a suspect." Adrian's eyes remained on the brass key, no longer in the room. "No," he said. "I mean to stop treating Lady Honoria as one." Lady Honoria did not return to Larkspur Park in tears. That would have been easier for everyone. Tears could be pitied, explained, softened, and folded away by evening. Instead, she returned with the old brass key in her glove and a stillness so complete that Mrs. Bell said nothing until they reached the drawing-room. The broken window had been boarded neatly. The room smelled of fresh wood, coal smoke, and paper dust. Honoria placed the key on the writing table, not hidden, not displayed, simply returned to where it belonged. Then she removed her bonnet and said, "Send for Mr. Voss." Mrs. Bell studied her face. "Now, my lady. Now." "And after him." Honoria looked toward the covered ledgers Sir Alistair had left in a locked chest, the estate books that most people assumed a lady would find dull, heavy, or beyond her understanding. She had spent half the night reading them by candlelight, tracing rent rolls, repairs, leases, arrears, names of families who had been treated as columns by men who never saw their kitchen fires go out. After him, send for the tenants who signed the new leases yesterday. Ask Mrs. Alden from South Meadow Farm to come if she is able. And send a discreet message to Brackenhurst Tenant Lane. Anyone who was asked to make a statement against me may speak here without fear. Mrs. Bell's brows rose, but her mouth approved. "That is a large net, my lady." "Then let us see what it catches." By mid-afternoon, Larkspur's drawing-room had become something no one in Hampshire would have expected. Not a parlour for wounded pride. Not a refuge where a shamed woman waited for a duke to decide whether she deserved rescue. It was a room of open books. Mr. Edmund Voss sat at the writing table with his spectacles low on his nose and two neat stacks of papers at his elbow. Mrs. Bell stood near the door like a gatekeeper in black bombazine. 3 Larkspur tenants had come first, uneasy in their Sunday coats and careful boots. Then came a shepherd from the western fields, a carpenter who had been promised work on the stables, and Mrs. Alden, an elderly tenant farmer's widow with a cane, a straight spine, and eyes that had seen enough landlords to measure character faster than title. Honoria did not take the largest chair. She stood at the table with the main ledger open before her. "I asked you here because untruth thrives best in rooms where the injured are absent," she said. "Today, we shall have no such room." Mr. Voss glanced at her with quiet admiration, then lowered his gaze to the papers. Mrs. Alden gave a small nod, as if Honoria had passed a test no one had told her she was taking. "Some of you have heard that I purchased Larkspur Park improperly," Honoria continued. "Some of you have been told that I intend to raise rents, close cottages, or sell grazing rights to Brackenhurst. Some of you, I believe, were pressured to sign statements suggesting that I obtained information by improper means." The carpenter shifted. One of the men from Brackenhurst Tenant Lane stared hard at the carpet. Honoria did not shame him by looking too long. "I will not ask any person to accuse another without cause. But I will place the estate books before you. Mr. Voss will read the purchase terms. The leases will be confirmed. If I have promised fairness, you shall hear that promise in daylight. The first hour was plain work, and perhaps for that reason, more powerful than drama." Mr. Voss read the relevant clauses. Honoria asked each tenant to confirm the lease name, acreage, rent, and term. When one man's rent had been copied incorrectly from Sir Alistair's old book, she corrected it downward, not upward. When Mrs. Alden asked whether the orchard wall would stand, Honoria answered at once. "It will stand. I intend to repair it before spring." "And the south cottages?" the widow asked. "They will not be cleared." A murmur moved through the room. Honoria looked at each face. "No family will be removed to make the park prettier. A house that begins by throwing people out deserves to remain empty." The words had scarcely settled when the footman announced the Duke of Caldermere. Every tenant rose or half rose in alarm. Honoria felt the room shrink toward him before he even entered. Such was rank. It needed no raised voice to rearrange every spine. Adrian stepped through the doorway, saw the ledgers, the tenants, Mr. Voss, Mrs. Bell, and Honoria at the table. He did not advance to the centre. He did not ask what was being done in a tone that made the answer seem like trespass. He removed his hat and remained near the back of the room. "Lady Honoria," he said. "I apologize for interrupting." "You are not interrupting if you are here to listen." A faint movement crossed his face. "Then I am here to listen." He stood beside the mantel, not seated, not presiding, his hands clasped behind his back. Honoria returned to the ledger before gratitude could become weakness in her voice. "Mrs. Alden, you wish to speak about the men who came to South Meadow in October." The old woman's fingers tightened around her cane. "Aye, my lady. 2 men came. One I knew from Brackenhurst, though I will not say he wanted to be there. They told my son the farm would be better surrendered quietly before the new arrangement." "What new arrangement?" Mr. Voss asked. Mrs. Alden looked toward the Duke, then back to Honoria. "They said Larkspur would be joined in practice to Brackenhurst. Said the cottages along the lower lane would be emptied, hedges cut back, and the meadows stocked for cover." "Cover for hunting?" Honoria asked. That was the word. The room changed. Adrian's expression did not, but his eyes hardened. Mrs. Alden continued, gaining courage from the silence. "They said Lady Octavia had friends who knew what was best for land. Said a lady owner would be persuaded, and if she wasn't, county opinion would do the persuading." One of the Brackenhurst Lane men made a low sound of shame. "I was asked to sign," he said suddenly. "Not that paper at the assembly. Before it. A statement saying I saw Lady Honoria near the old gate at odd hours. I didn't sign." "Who asked you?" Honoria said. He looked at Adrian, then away. "Mr. Hale, the contractor. The one hired to replace the boundary lock." Mr. Voss's pen stopped. Adrian took one step forward, then checked himself. Honoria noticed. So did Mrs. Bell. "Mr. Hale was not hired by me," Honoria said. "Nor by Sir Alistair," Mr. Voss added. Adrian's voice was quiet. "He has done work for Brackenhurst during my absence." Honoria looked at him. Not accusation. Not forgiveness. A demand for steadiness. "By whose order?" "That is what I intend to learn." "No," she said gently, and the whole room listened. "That is what we intend to learn." For the first time that day, something like respect moved through the tenants, not toward the Duke, but between him and the woman at the table. Adrian inclined his head. "Yes. We." The final piece came from a folded bill Mrs. Alden had kept because, as she said, old women survived by saving paper younger people threw away. It was a contractor's note for ironwork on the Larkspur boundary, marked paid from Brackenhurst household funds and initialed with a small, elegant O. Not proof enough for a court. More than enough for a drawing room that understood initials, influence, and fear. Honoria laid it beside the old brass key. "Then the lock was changed before I arrived," she said. "So that I would look like an intruder at a gate I had reason to approach." Mr. Voss removed his spectacles. "And so any claim about trespass would appear plausible." Adrian's jaw tightened. Lady Octavia knew before the county knew. No one spoke. The silence did not need help. Near dusk, the tenants left by the side door with leases confirmed and shoulders straighter than when they entered. Mrs. Alden paused before Honoria. "Your mother was kind when she was a girl here," she said. "Quiet, but kind. It seems Larkspur remembers its own." Honoria could not answer at once. She only took the old woman's hand. When the room emptied, Adrian remained by the mantel. "You should not have had to do this yourself," he said. "I did not do it because I had to." Honoria closed the ledger. "I did it because if I waited for you to clear my name, it would still be yours to return." He accepted the cut. "And now?" "Now it is mine to defend." A footman appeared with a silver tray bearing an envelope sealed in grey wax. Honoria opened it while Adrian watched. The invitation was written in Lady Octavia's perfect hand. Brackenhurst would host a dinner in 2 nights' time, for the purpose of settling recent unpleasantness properly among those most concerned. Honoria read the line once, then handed it to Adrian. His eyes darkened. She wants the room back. Honoria looked toward the key, the ledgers, and the names of people who had trusted her enough to speak. Then we shall bring the truth into it. Rain began before the lamps were lit, a thin Hampshire rain that blurred the windows of Larkspur Park and turned the unfinished drive into ribbons of dark mud. Honoria stood in the drawing-room with Lady Octavia's invitation on the table before her, its grey seal broken, its phrases as elegant as a blade tucked inside satin. A dinner to settle recent unpleasantness properly. Properly. The word did more work than any accusation. It meant witnesses selected by rank, sympathy arranged by hostess, truth forced to knock politely before entering a room already furnished for its defeat. Mrs. Bell had ordered stronger tea than usual and placed herself near the hearth with her knitting, though she had not knitted a stitch in 20 minutes. Mr. Voss had departed to secure 2 additional papers from Winchester before the Brackenhurst dinner, leaving Honoria with ledgers, tenant statements, the contractor's bill, and a question no document could answer. Could a man who had twice wounded her with doubt be trusted to stand beside her when doubt became public spectacle? At 5:30, the maid announced the Duke of Caldermere. Adrian entered with rain darkening the shoulders of his greatcoat and restraint evident in every movement. He paused inside the doorway until Honoria looked up from the table. Mrs. Bell remained exactly where she was. "Your Grace," Honoria said. "Lady Honoria." He bowed, then turned to the housekeeper. "Mrs. Bell." The old woman nodded. "Your Grace." He removed his gloves slowly, not because he wished to delay, but because haste would have made the room smaller. Honoria noticed that he did not come immediately to the table. He waited as if her house had taught him its terms. "You received Lady Octavia's invitation," he said. "So did you, I assume." "I received a command disguised as hospitality." "Then we read it the same way." "That is not always enough." His gaze moved to her face. "No. It is not." The rain tapped steadily at the windows. Honoria gestured to the chair opposite her, then changed her mind before he Saturday. "Perhaps we should stand." A flicker of pain crossed his expression and vanished. "As you wish." She picked up the invitation. "Lady Octavia wants witnesses. She wants control. She will have both, if I arrive merely as the woman you have chosen to defend. That is not what I want. Intentions are easier than consequences, Your Grace. I have learned that from you." He accepted it without flinching. That almost unsettled her more than a denial would have done. "I came because I owe you more than evidence." "You have evidence?" "Yes." He opened the leather case he had brought and placed several papers on the table, carefully distant from the brass key. The contractor who replaced the lock was paid from Brackenhurst household funds. The order was entered under general maintenance, but the initial beside it is Lady Octavia's. My secretary found 2 drafts of household instructions that were never sent through the proper estate office. One concerns the South Lane. The other mentions discouraging premature access to Larkspur. "Discouraging," Honoria repeated. "A remarkable word for locking a woman away from her own gate." "It is." He placed another sheet beside the first. "This is a sample of Lady Octavia's hand from a note she wrote regarding flowers for the west drawing-room. This is the warning letter I was given before I insulted you. The hand is disguised, but not enough." Honoria looked down. The lines were not identical. They were worse than identical. They had the same habits pretending to be strangers. The capital L curled in the same restrained hook. The spacing narrowed at the end of each line. Even deception carried vanity. "Mr. Voss will find this useful," she said. "It is not enough for a court," Adrian replied. "But this is not a court. It is a county room, and county rooms have convicted women on less than a pause." Honoria looked up at him. "You know that now." "I should have known it before." The answer came quietly. "No polish. No ducal distance. I thought myself careful because I did not raise my voice. I thought myself fair because I used measured words. I was neither. In my own dining room, I chose order over truth, and in my study I nearly did it again." Mrs. Bell's needles stopped. Honoria held herself very still. "Nearly?" "No," he said. Not nearly. I did it again, only more politely. The honesty reached her before she could defend against it. I asked the key to remain visible because I wanted to control the room. I told myself it protected the matter from further invention. In truth, it asked you to bear suspicion neatly so my house would not look disordered. And do you know what that felt like? No, his voice lowered. But I know I caused it. Silence gathered, deep and sharp. Honoria had expected him to bring proof, perhaps even anger on her behalf. She had not expected this. She had not expected him to make no excuse for the part of him that still thought like a duke before he thought like a man. I am not asking forgiveness tonight, he said. I would not trust it if you offered it quickly. Wise. The word came out before she could soften it. His mouth tightened, almost a smile and not one at all. I am asking what you require at Brackenhurst. Honoria walked to the window and looked out at the darkening lawn. The boarded window was visible in the side room beyond, a square of raw wood where glass had been. In 2 days, Lady Octavia would fill Brackenhurst with the same class of witnesses who had lowered their eyes at Hartmere House and widened them at Anonymous Inc. If Adrian spoke for her, they would say she had conquered him. If he stayed silent, they would say he had withdrawn protection. If she stood alone, they might admire her courage while still letting the lie survive. There was no path that did not cut somewhere. I require the truth, she said. That, you have. No. I require the truth from you. He did not answer at once. She turned from the window. Not simply Lady Octavia's wrongdoing. Yours. The word struck the room. Mrs. Bell looked down at her knitting, as if granting them privacy by force of will. Adrian's face changed, not with offense, but with recognition of a debt presented in full. Yes, he said. Before everyone, Honoria added. Not as a flourish. Not as a generous correction. I will not enter Brackenhurst to be rescued in the very house where you first gave them permission to despise me. I understand. Do you? Her voice trembled once, then steadied. Because if you call her a liar but leave yourself noble, society will keep the part of the story it prefers. They will say you were deceived by a clever woman. They will say I was fortunate you discovered the trick. They will say your judgment was bruised, but mine was always questionable. I will not accept that bargain. Adrian took the blow because it was truth. Then I will not offer it. Do not love me privately if you are ashamed to be corrected publicly. The words left her before she had decided to speak them. Once spoken, they altered the room. Mrs. Bell became very still. Rain moved over the glass. Adrian looked at Honoria as if the sentence had opened a chamber in him he had refused to enter. I am not ashamed of correction, he said. I am ashamed that it was necessary. Honoria's throat tightened, but she did not look away. There is a difference. I know. He stepped no closer. That mattered. He did not reach for her hand. That mattered more. At Brackenhurst, I will say what I did. I will say I spoke without truth. I will say my words made room for cruelty. I will say the suspicion against you survived because my pride gave it shelter. The tenderness in his voice was not softness. It was discipline. And after that, I will present the evidence only when you permit me to do so. You ask permission now very often. I used to mistake permission for weakness. And now? Now I think it may be the only honest beginning of trust. Honoria looked at the papers on the table, the rain-dark windows, the brass key that had survived every attempt to turn memory into accusation. Something inside her did not forgive him. Not yet. But it stopped bracing for his next injury. That was not love. It was not safety. It was a narrow bridge, and for the first time, she could see that he was willing to cross only if she allowed it. You may speak at Brackenhurst, she said. After I do. He bowed his head. After you do. And if Lady Octavia produces another letter. Then I will ask who benefits from ink that never bears a name. And if the room turns against me again? Then I will not stand before you unless you ask it. His eyes held hers. I will stand beside you. The answer was dangerously near what she had needed and terribly far from what she could trust. She folded Lady Octavia's invitation and set it beneath the contractor's bill. "Then prepare your room, Your Grace." He put the papers back into the leather case, leaving copies for Mr. Voss. At the door, he paused. "Lady Honoria." "Yes?" "Whatever happens in that room, Larkspur will not be swallowed by Brackenhurst. Not by Lady Octavia. Not by me." She believed he meant it. Belief was not yet surrender. "See that it is not." He bowed and left. Through the rain-streaked window, Honoria watched his carriage lamps move down the drive toward the boundary. At Brackenhurst that night, Adrian did not go to Lady Octavia. He went to the butler and ordered the largest dinner of the season prepared, every important neighbor invited, every necessary witness seated, and the drawing-room opened after the meal. When the butler asked whether the matter was celebratory, the Duke looked toward the dark line of trees hiding Larkspur Park and answered, "No. It is overdue." By the evening of the Brackenhurst dinner, the house had been polished until it looked incapable of wrongdoing. Every mirror shone, every branch of candles burned steadily, every footman moved with the silent precision of a household determined to prove that order still belonged to the Whitecliffs. Honoria saw all of it from the carriage window as she arrived with Mrs. Bell on one side and Mr. Voss on the other, a small party by rank and an inconvenient one by purpose. The old brass key rested beneath her glove, fastened to its ribbon at her wrist. It did not comfort her. Comfort was too soft a word for what it gave. It reminded her that memory could survive accusation, and that a woman could carry her own door even into a room designed to close around her. Brackenhurst Hall opened before her as it had on the day of her first arrival, but tonight the steps were lined with lamps, and carriages crowded the drive. Hampshire had come to dine on scandal. Mrs. Wilton was there with her magistrate husband. Sir Alastair Larkspur had returned from the coast looking tired but determined. Mrs. Alden had been placed among the selected tenant witnesses, dressed in her best black gown and wearing a bonnet that had clearly been brushed into submission. Miss Dorothea Pike stood with her mother near a marble column, pale with nerves beneath her practised sweetness. Lady Octavia Fenwick presided at the entrance of the drawing-room in silver-grey silk, gracious as a carved saint and twice as cold. When Honoria entered, conversations thinned, then reformed around her. That was how society showed hunger. It did not pounce. It waited with a glass in its hand. Adrian Whitecliff stood near the staircase, speaking to Sir Alastair, and looked up the moment she crossed the threshold. He did not hurry to her. He did not claim her before the room. He bowed first to Mrs. Bell, then to Mr. Voss, then to Honoria, each gesture exact. "Lady Honoria." "Your Grace." "Sir Alastair has arrived safely," he said. "And Mr. Hale?" Honoria asked quietly. "Not yet." His expression did not alter, but she heard the answer beneath the answer. The contractor had been invited. Whether he would dare come was another matter. Lady Octavia glided toward them before more could be said. "My dear Lady Honoria, how composed you look." "I admire that." Not every woman could dine in the house where so much misunderstanding has gathered. "Misunderstanding has travelled widely this week," Honoria replied. "I thought it time to let it sit down and be seen." Lady Octavia's smile sharpened. "How vivid." "Truth often is." Adrian's gaze moved briefly to Honoria, and she felt, despite herself, the steadiness of his presence. Dinner was announced before Lady Octavia could answer. The procession into the dining room was correct in every outward respect and violent in none, yet each placement carried meaning. Lady Octavia had arranged herself near the foot of the table with Dorothea close enough to be useful. Honoria was seated not beside Adrian, which would have fed gossip, but near Sir Alastair and Mr. Voss, where fact could breathe. Mrs. Alden and the other tenant witnesses were not placed at the main table, but they had been invited to dine in the smaller breakfast room and would be brought in after the meal, a compromise between rank and necessity. Honoria understood the concession and accepted it. Victorian society might bend for truth, but it rarely broke its own furniture to make room for it. The courses passed in a blur of silver, wine, and strained civility. Lady Octavia spoke of road repairs, church flowers, and the unfortunate decline of manners in anonymous correspondence. Dorothea laughed too brightly. Sir Alastair ate little. Mr. Voss answered every attempt at legal curiosity with a dryness that made speculation die at the edge of his plate. Adrian said less than anyone. When he did speak, the table listened. When he did not, the silence gathered around him like authority being held in reserve. Honoria forced herself to taste each dish. She had learned that a woman under scrutiny must never appear too injured to eat, too angry to converse, or too eager to defend herself. Society punished appetite when it came from women it wished to shame. After dessert, Lady Octavia rose with exquisite timing. "Perhaps," she said, "we might take coffee in the drawing room. There are certain matters too unpleasant for a dining table, but too persistent to ignore." The room accepted the movement as if it were ordinary. It was not. In the drawing room, chairs had been arranged in conversational clusters that could become a tribunal with the turn of a shoulder. Mrs. Alden, the Brackenhurst Lane men, and 2 Larkspur tenants were brought in discreetly by the butler. Mr. Rawlins, the steward, stood near the door with a face set in misery. Dorothea twisted her gloves. Lady Octavia took the space near the hearth as though born to moral sorrow. "No one here desires harshness," she began. "Least of all I. But recent events have placed Brackenhurst, Larkspur, and the good opinion of this county in an uncomfortable position. A lady has acquired property in circumstances that, while perhaps lawful, have been accompanied by secrecy, intrusion, accusations against this household, and the distressing appearance of a key where it ought not to have been." Honoria stood near the writing table Adrian had placed in the room, the same sort of table before which she had once been made small at dinner. She felt the key at her wrist, hidden but present. Lady Octavia turned toward her with false regret. "Lady Honoria, if there has been imprudence rather than wickedness, this is the moment to say so. A frank confession, modestly given, can heal much." Mrs. Bell made a sound under her breath that only Honoria heard. Adrian remained still. He did not rescue. He waited. Honoria stepped forward. "I purchased Larkspur Park through Mr. Edmund Voss from Sir Alastair Larkspur. I paid a fair price from funds left to me through my mother's trust. I did not enter Brackenhurst study before the day I was summoned there. I did not steal plans, threaten tenants, seduce sympathy, or bargain with anything other than lawful money and a written promise to honor existing leases." The word seduce made several faces flinch, as if they had not enjoyed implying it for days. "Good. Let them hear the ugliness plainly." Lady Octavia sighed. "So forceful. Yet force is not proof." "No," Mr. Voss said. "Documents are." He placed copies on the table. Sir Alastair stepped forward next, leaning on his cane. "I sold willingly. Lady Honoria behaved honorably. I say that before every person here." A murmur moved through the room. Lady Octavia let it pass, then lifted one final paper from her reticule. "Then perhaps someone can explain this." Dorothea went white. Adrian noticed. Honoria noticed Adrian noticing. Lady Octavia unfolded the letter with delicate reluctance. "This came to me anonymously, though I hesitated to show it. It suggests that Mr. Voss's devotion to Lady Honoria's interests may not be entirely professional, and that Sir Alastair's generosity may have been encouraged by private tenderness rather than business." Mrs. Wilton gasped. Sir Alastair flushed with anger. Mr. Voss became very still. The attack was so crude beneath its lace that for a heartbeat Honoria could not speak. Then Adrian moved. He did not stride to the center like an avenger. He came to Honoria's side and stopped close enough that the room understood his position, not close enough to turn her into a possession. He looked at her, not at Lady Octavia. "May I speak?" The question was soft. It carried farther than shouting. Honoria met his eyes. In them she saw anger, remorse, and something more dangerous because it asked nothing for itself. Trust offered back in the shape of restraint. "Yes," she said. Adrian turned to the room and took the forged letter from Lady Octavia's hand. For the first time all evening, her composure flickered. He looked at the paper, then at every face waiting to see which woman would be ruined by it. His voice was calm when he spoke. Calm enough to make the candle seem louder. "This is not Lady Honoria's shame. It is mine." The drawing room did not breathe. Adrian held the forged letter between 2 fingers, not as if it were dangerous, but as if it were dirty. Lady Octavia's face remained composed for one more second, and then something beneath the powder and silk tightened. "Your Grace," she said, softly enough to sound wounded, "that is an extraordinary statement. It should have been made sooner." His voice carried to every corner of the room. "When Lady Honoria first came to Brackenhurst, I allowed implication to stand in place of evidence. I spoke to her publicly as though suspicion were fact. My words gave this county permission to doubt her character, her business, and her right to stand on land that was lawfully hers." A murmur stirred, then died when he looked up. "That was my failure." Honoria stood beside him, still as a candle flame in a closed room. She had thought she wanted his confession. She had not known how difficult it would be to hear him make himself smaller in order to give her back the space he had taken. Lady Octavia moved her fan open with a soft snap. "Noble, certainly. But misplaced. Your Grace was deceived, as many of us were, by circumstances that any prudent person might question." "No," Adrian said. "I was deceived because I found the deception convenient." The room stilled again. Sir Alistair bowed his head, not in shame, but in recognition of courage when it cost something. Adrian placed the anonymous letter on the table beside the warning letter, the contractor's bill, and 2 samples of Lady Octavia's handwriting. "Mr. Voss, if you please." The solicitor stepped forward. His manner remained dry, almost plain, and that plainness gave the room no emotional excess to dismiss. The purchase of Larkspur Park was completed legally. Funds came from a trust settled upon Lady Honoria Vale through her late mother. Sir Alistair signed willingly. Existing leases were preserved at Lady Honoria's request. He tapped the contractor's bill. The boundary lock was replaced before Lady Honoria took possession. Payment came through Brackenhurst household accounts, marked under general maintenance, but the initial beside the charge is not His Grace's. Nor is it Mr. Rawlins's. Mr. Rawlins looked as if he would have preferred the floor to open and swallow him. "It is Lady Octavia's," Adrian said. Lady Octavia gave a light laugh, beautifully shaped and entirely false. "I authorized many small matters during your absence. A lock is hardly a conspiracy. A lock alone, no. A lock, a warning letter, a stone through a window, pressure upon tenants, and a key placed inside my study cabinet begin to form a pattern." He lifted the forged letter she had produced moments earlier. "And now this." Dorothea swayed slightly. Her mother caught her arm. Adrian turned to her, not cruelly, which somehow made it worse. "Miss Pike, who gave you the anonymous letter at Hartmere House?" Dorothea's mouth opened. Lady Octavia's eyes flashed toward her like a command. The girl trembled. "I found it." "Where?" "By the lemonade. Placed there before you arrived." I don't know." "Did Lady Octavia tell you to lift it?" Dorothea's eyes filled. Her performance had deserted her, leaving only a frightened young woman who had wanted position and had mistaken malice for instruction. "She said if I saw anything concerning Larkspur, I shouldn't ignore it." Lady Octavia's fan stopped moving. "Dorothea." "I'm sorry," Dorothea whispered. "I didn't write it. I only read it." She said no one would believe Lady Honoria unless there was pressure first. She said county opinion had to be guided. The words fell into the room one by one. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Ruin rarely needed volume when truth had finally entered. Mrs. Wilton made a small sound of distress. Mrs. Pike turned pale enough to look ill. Lady Octavia straightened. A foolish girl's confusion is not proof. "No," Adrian said. "But Mr. Hale's statement will be." The door opened on cue, and the contractor was brought in by the butler, hat crushed in both hands. He was not a villain from a melodrama. He was an anxious man with mud on his boots and fear in his throat. "Your Grace," he said, bowing repeatedly. "I meant no harm." "Then tell the truth." Mr. Hale swallowed. Lady Octavia ordered the boundary lock changed. Said it was Brackenhurst interest. Said Lady Honoria was not to have easy access until matters were settled. "I was paid from the household account." His eyes moved to Honoria. "I did not throw the stone, my lady. But I told a boy from the lane there might be a coin if a message were delivered. I did not know it would break glass." Honoria's face did not change, but Adrian's did. "You will make written admission before Mr. Voss tonight," the Duke said. "And you will repair the window at your own cost, after which you will accept no further work on either estate without written permission from its lawful owner." "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Octavia had gone very white beneath her composure. "This is grotesque. You would humiliate a lady of your own circle on the word of contractors and tenants." Honoria stepped forward then. Not far. Only enough that the room's attention shifted from the Duke to her. "You did not object to humiliating a woman when you believed her alone." Lady Octavia turned on her. "You bought what did not belong among your expectations." "No. I bought what was offered for sale." "You wished Larkspur to become an extension of Brackenhurst, useful, silent, and obedient. I disappointed you by becoming its mistress instead." A ripple moved through the room. This time, it was not scandal. It was recognition. Honoria touched the ribbon at her wrist and drew the old brass key into view. "This key was my mother's memory. It was turned into an accusation because it was easier to believe a woman stole access than to accept that she had inherited belonging. Let that end tonight." Adrian looked at her then, and the apology in his eyes was quieter than any speech. But he did not interrupt. She had the room. He let her keep it. "Larkspur Park will not be folded into Brackenhurst," Honoria continued. "Its tenants will keep their leases. Its cottages will not be cleared for sport. Its gates will be opened or closed by those with rightful authority, not by fear, gossip, or convenience." Sir Alistair's cane struck the carpet once, not loudly, but with feeling. Mrs. Alden bowed her head. Adrian turned to Lady Octavia. "You will no longer act as hostess, advisor, or representative of House Wycliffe in any county matter. Your rooms at Brackenhurst will be vacated at your convenience within the week. My carriage will take you to your brother in Bath whenever you are ready." Lady Octavia's mouth trembled for the first time. "You would exile me for protecting your house. You endangered my house when you taught it to be unjust." He looked toward Mrs. Pike and Dorothea. "Miss Pike will leave Hampshire with her mother tomorrow. I will not ruin a young lady for being foolish under influence, but neither will I allow her to profit from cruelty." Dorothea burst into silent tears. No one comforted her except her mother, and that was consequence enough for the moment. The room had altered completely. The same walls that once held Honoria's humiliation now held Lady Octavia's exposure, Dorothea's confession, and Adrian's public shame offered willingly before them all. Yet Honoria did not feel triumphant. Triumph was too sharp and too lonely. What she felt was steadier. The ground beneath her seemed to have remembered her weight. Adrian turned back to her in front of every witness. "Lady Honoria," he said, "the place was always yours. I was the one who had to learn mine." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything the county would repeat by morning. Honoria looked at him, the man who had wounded her, the Duke who had corrected himself before those who worshipped his rank, and the neighbor who had finally understood that protection without humility was only another form of possession. "Then let us be clear, Your Grace," she said. "I accept the truth spoken tonight. I accept the restoration of my name. I do not accept being turned into a symbol of your remorse. Nor would I ask it." His voice changed, low enough that only those nearest heard. "I ask only the right to court you honorably, when and if you permit it." A softer murmur passed through the room, but it no longer had teeth. Honoria did not answer with blush or tears. She folded the key back into her glove and looked around at the faces that had once waited for her to fall. "Tonight was not a proposal," she said. "It was justice. Let us not confuse the two." Adrian bowed, and this time there was no uncertainty in the gesture. "As you wish." Outside, beyond the glass and candlelight, the dark line of trees hid Larkspur Park from view. But Honoria no longer felt that it waited in shadow. It stood where it had always stood, separate, named, and hers. 3 weeks after the Brackenhurst dinner, Larkspur Park opened its doors without apology. It was not yet restored. No sensible person would have claimed so. The west corridor still smelled faintly of limewash, 2 guest chambers remained under Holland covers, and the orchard wall waited for warmer weather before any mason could coax it back into strength. Yet the front steps had been scrubbed, the cracked tiles in the entrance hall had been reset, and every window shone with the stubborn pride of a house that had refused to remain neglected once someone loved it enough to begin. Honoria stood at the foot of the staircase as the first guests arrived for a small estate dinner, her gown a deep amber silk that had belonged to her mother and had been altered by Mrs. Bell with such care that memory itself seemed to have found a better fit. At her wrist, beneath the edge of her glove, the old brass boundary key rested on its dark ribbon. She had not worn it to make a point. She no longer needed to. The point had been made in a room full of witnesses, and Hampshire had carried it from drawing-room to breakfast table, from church porch to carriage yard, until even those who had never admitted doubt began speaking of Lady Honoria Vale with careful respect. Not poor Lady Honoria. Not unfortunate Lady Honoria. The phrase had changed. Mistress of Larkspur Park. It sounded strange the first time Mrs. Wilton said it over a calling card. It sounded steadier when Sir Alistair wrote it in his note of thanks. By tonight, hearing it announced at her own door, Honoria felt neither surprise nor triumph. She felt responsibility. That was better. Mrs. Alden came with her son and daughter-in-law, solemn in their best clothes and carrying a basket of winter preserves because, as she informed Mrs. Bell, no housewarming was respectable without something useful. Mr. Edmund Voss arrived from Winchester with papers tied in blue ribbon and a rare smile. Sir Alistair came last among the early guests, thinner than before but brighter in the eyes, leaning on his cane as he paused in the hall. "Your mother would have liked the lamps there," he said, nodding toward the wall sconces. Honoria swallowed gently. "Do you think so?" She disliked gloomy corners. "Then we shall have none." The dinner was small by county standards and enormous by Larkspur's recent history. The tenants were not seated beside gentry in a way that would have made everyone stiff and self-conscious, but they were honoured before the meal, received in the great hall, and thanked by name for their work in bringing the estate back to order. Afterward, the principal guests dined in the south dining room, where the table was not long enough to diminish conversation. That pleased Honoria. A table could be too grand to be kind. No one spoke Lady Octavia's name until the second course, and even then it came quietly from Mrs. Wilton, who had learned that curiosity should travel behind tact rather than ahead of it. "I am told Lady Octavia has settled in Bath with her brother." Honoria set down her glass. "So I understand." "She will find Bath society less forgiving than she expects," Sir Alistair said. "It enjoys invalids and gossip in equal measure, but it dislikes being made to look foolish." Mr. Voss added dryly, "She has discovered that letters written in haste can be expensive companions." No one laughed loudly. The matter was not amusing, not exactly. Lady Octavia had lost more than rooms at Brackenhurst. She had lost the authority to arrange truth for others and have it accepted because her gloves were clean. Dorothea Pike had been taken out of the county by her mother 2 mornings after the dinner. Honoria had received one note from the girl, blotched, awkward, and brief. It did not excuse everything. It did not need to. It admitted enough. Honoria had placed it in a drawer, not with forgiveness complete, but with anger no longer hungry. The meal ended with pears poached in wine, and later the guests moved to the drawing-room, where the broken window had been replaced. No one mentioned it. That silence, for once, was mercy rather than evasion. When the last carriage rolled away and Mrs. Bell had gone to inspect the silver with the devotion of a general reviewing troops, Honoria stepped outside for air. The night was clear and cold. Frost silvered the grass, and the stars above Hampshire looked close enough to rest upon the bare branches. Larkspur stood behind her with light in its windows. Not every room. Not yet. Enough. She walked the south lane alone until she reached the old boundary gate. It had been repaired 2 days earlier. The ivy had been cut back, the hinges cleaned, and the lock restored to one that accepted the brass key her mother had kept. On the other side lay Brackenhurst land, dark and quiet beneath the same sky. The gate remained closed. Honoria had left it so. A figure stood beyond it, hat in hand, coat dark against the frost. Adrian Whitecliffe did not touch the bars. He did not call through them as if summoning her. He waited until she saw him, and then he bowed. "Lady Honoria." "Your Grace." "I hope I haven't come too late." "It is not late." Her breath clouded faintly in the cold. "It is only quiet." That is better. He looked toward the lit windows of Larkspur. Your house looked happy tonight. The words warmed her more than praise of her gown or table would have done. It is beginning to remember how. And you? She looked at the gate before answering. I am beginning to believe remembering is not the same as returning. My mother's Larkspur is gone. Sir Alistair's Larkspur is gone. Mine is still being made. Adrian nodded. Then I will not ask to enter as if I already know it. A small smile touched her before she could prevent it. You are becoming cautious. No. I am becoming educated. There is a difference. A necessary one. Silence settled, but it no longer strained. Since the Brackenhurst dinner, he had not pressed her. He had called twice, always by daylight, always with Mrs. Bell present. He had sent copies of every relevant estate paper, not as gifts, but as records. He had dismissed the steward's assistant who had assisted Lady Octavia, retained Mr. Rawlins after a written apology and supervision, and ordered the Brackenhurst tenant lane repaired at Brackenhurst expense. More important, he had not made his remorse into a performance that required her applause. He had done the work and left her free to decide what it meant. Honoria drew the brass key from beneath her glove. Adrian saw it and grew still. The lock is restored, he asked. Yes. I am glad. She stepped closer to the gate. Are you? More than I deserve to be. That is not an answer. His mouth softened. Yes. I am glad because a gate should not be closed by another person's fear. It should be opened by the one who has the right. Honoria fitted the key into the lock. The metal turned with a low, clean sound. She did not open the gate yet. If I open this, it does not make Larkspur part of Brackenhurst. No, it does not make my land a corridor to yours. Never. It does not mean I have forgotten. I would not ask you to. She looked through the ironwork at him. Then what does it mean? Adrian held her gaze. Only what you choose it to mean. That was the answer that opened the gate more surely than the key. Honoria drew it inward. The hinges moved without protest. Adrian did not step through. He waited on the far side, and the restraint in him was so complete that her heart recognized it before pride could object. May I? He asked. She moved back, leaving space. Yes. He crossed slowly, as if entering not an estate but a trust not yet fully earned. When he stood beside her on Larkspur soil, he did not reach for her hand. I love you, he said, and the plainness of it struck deeper than eloquence. I love your courage, your judgment, your refusal to let pain make you cruel, and your insistence that respect arrive before tenderness. I love the house you are making because it is honest. I love that you made me understand the difference between protection and partnership. Honoria's throat tightened. Adrian. It was the first time she had spoken his name without title. He heard it. His eyes changed. I am asking to court you no longer as apology, but as hope. And if one day you consent to marry me, Larkspur remains Larkspur. Its deeds, its tenants, its name, and its gate remain yours. I want no estate swallowed. I want a life shared. She looked back at the house, at the modest lights glowing through the windows, at the repaired lane, at the gate her mother had once known. Then she looked at him. Love, she had learned, was not the absence of power. It was the choice not to misuse it. Then ask me properly, she said softly. A breath left him, almost laughter, almost disbelief. Lady Honoria Vale, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my neighbor, my equal, and the only person in Hampshire who may correct me before breakfast? She laughed then, not loudly, but freely enough that the sound seemed to surprise the frost. Yes, she said. But I reserve the right to correct you after breakfast as well. I'll require the discipline. You will. He smiled, and in that smile the cold Duke of Brackenhurst vanished, leaving the man who had learned to stand at a gate and wait. Honoria placed her hand in his, not because he took it, but because she gave it. The brass key rested warm between their palms. Behind them, Larkspur Park held its own light. Beyond the open gate, Brackenhurst waited, separate and no longer threatening. 2 estates. 2 names. A path between them opened only by choice. The key turned in Lady Honoria's hand, and for the first time, the gate opened because she chose it.